Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for everyone who's stuck with us throughout this Event Talk Live afternoon. Now it's time for my favorite part of the event, our Event Talk with the Experts panel discussion. I'm joined by three incredible professionals, one of whom you've already met. So Nicole is back. Thank you so much for joining us again, Nicole. And then I'm also joined by Marisa Brown of Venus Promotions and Julie Fedenkoff of Ringmaster Events. So thank you all for being here. Just to jump right into things, I'm going to ask each of you, and Nicole, I know you already did this, but there might have been some people who missed our first session, but I'm going to ask each of you to please introduce yourselves and just give us a brief background of your history and events. So Julie, let's start with you.
Brief background. All right, I'll try to be short. So I am a sponsorship director for major music festivals. And I have experience and history throughout experiential marketing as well, so which has led to me to where I currently am now, and that's the short version.
Awesome. And Marisa?
Hello, everybody. My name is Marisa. Again, you guys are listening to that. Everybody sees Marisa, but it's Marisa. And I love the brief history thing because it's funny, but I'm kind of like Julie. I'll keep it brief. I started in promotions a long time ago. Like, I'm talking old school promotions, sitting outside of the stores with the signs trying to get people to buy things type of promotions. And then that led into liquor sales and promotions. And I did trade shows and things like that. So that led me into the events industry. So that's a very short bio. And I also own a couple of companies, and one of them is Venus Promotions, where we do hybrid and virtual events. So
awesome. And then Nicole?
Yeah, I have to laugh too at the keep it brief. Yeah, okay. I've been doing events for a little over 20 years now, working on the nonprofit and the corporate side. It's run the gamut from fundraisers to, VIP events to trade shows, conferences, et cetera, et cetera. That's the real short version.
Awesome. Thank you all. And if anyone in the audience wants the long version, all of the speakers' bios are in the virtual event hub. If you go back to the agenda page, you can read everyone's bio, check out their social media, check out their websites. But thank you all for introducing yourselves. And the next question I have for each of you, and in the questions I sent you in advance, it was two questions, but I'm going to kind of roll them together. So I'd like each of you to talk a little bit about what your relationship is to kind of the sales cycle in the event industry and in your role right now. And then how closely do you work with sales reps or sales teams? And what does that sales process kind of look like? Because I know you're each coming from a bit of a different perspective. So let's start with Marisa this time.
Perfect. Yeah, so this is a great question. And I honestly think that sales is part of everything that you end up doing in events. I don't really think there isn't a part that you're not doing sales. Personally, for my own business, myself, and whoever is working with me, we handle the sales part of it, right? So we handle what the sales are going to what sales are happening, what pricing is going to be like, who we're working with. Generally speaking, I work with the sales team that I'm working with. If it's from the venue, if it's from the company that I'm working with, I work with their sales and their marketing teams. If I have an assistant or whatever, they will do some of the smaller pieces and things like that. But it just depends on the size and scope of the event with a project manager versus me running most of the back end stuff. But then I tend to take on that sales role. So I'm very heavily involved in the sales of whatever happens, and also creating the sales plan. So creating what pricing is going to look like, what the structure will look like for marketing, what are we going to actually do, what we will roll out, how will that be, what phases we'll have for the sales cycle. So.
And then Nicole, I'll ask you to go next. And once again, this is a little bit of a repeat, but just for anyone who might have missed the first session.
That's fine. I like to call myself like a client relationship manager, versus sales per se, because as it was stated, sales isn't everything that we do in events. It's not just in this box. And to me, it's the responsibility actually of everyone to be a part of that process. So for me, directly, I take sales from A to Z. So, a client will call in and we go through the whole spiel, if you know what I mean, but I just then don't hand them off to a colleague and who will do the logistics. No, and call it as just a planner in me. That's who I am. I see it all the way through to the process. So
awesome. And then finally, Julie.
Similar to Nicole and Marisa, it's start to finish. From the beginning of when someone wants to come in as a sponsor of an event, or if I'm cold calling, reaching out, to new potential sponsors, as well as, it is start to finish. And I agree with Nicole. I hate calling myself a salesperson. I know at the end of the day, technically that's what I am, but I don't look at it that way at all. It's very much building relationships, similar to what Nicole said. That is the key and the secret special sauce to anyone who is in specifically sponsorships, because it's different than a traditional sales role. But at the same time, building those relationships, and, one of the most important aspects of that is looking at the long term, especially for event sponsorships that happen, once a year. So getting into the long game, if you will, is a really important piece of that, and building those relationships is definitely the key to that. And as far as my relationship with the rest of the event, it is specifically sponsorship, but similar to what the other two ladies have said, is that it touches everything. So I am involved in everything from ticketing to parking to production to all of those different pieces, marketing specifically. That's probably the team I work the closest with. But outside of that, it just across the board. And I try to build those relationships internally too, because that makes a massive difference.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that context from all three of you. So just for the audience, so Nicole, I'm going to direct most of the questions about venue sales towards you. Julie, you'll be our sponsorship sales expert. And then Marisa, you'll talk about creating revenue driving experiences for brands. So those are kind of the three various perspectives that all of our panelists are coming from. Just another reminder for the audience. So the Q&A, audience Q&A at the end of this session is actually going to be in a workshop. So after the session, rather than doing Q&A through the text and I'll read your questions off, you'll actually have the opportunity to ask your questions to our panelists face to face. So after this session is over, just head back out to the main menu, to the agenda, and click on the Q&A, audience Q&A workshop, and you'll be able to ask questions of our panelists. Awesome. So jumping right into it, Marisa, I'd like to start with you. So when a brand or a client comes to you with an idea for an event and they have a specific sales or revenue goal in mind, what kind of setup questions do you ask the client to make sure that you're creating an experience that works towards that goal?
Oh man, I love this question, because it's literally one of the first things I start working out with somebody, because I like to say people have what they think they need in their head, right? And they don't actually, so they more or less know what they want. They don't actually know what they need to get them there. So a lot of times the idea that somebody comes to you with needs to be tweaked, right? Or fine-tuned. Sometimes it's great. It doesn't need much, but other times you're like, what you really have to do is look at the goal. What is the goal of what they are trying to do? What's the expected outcome? What will make them happy, and what does success look like? So there's different things, right? So one is, what does success look like for you? So what would success look like for this? What is the goal of this, right? Who's our intended audience? So all of those questions that you're going to ask are going to give you the answers that you need to figure out how you want to structure something to really engage and drive revenue. So I think that those three questions you have to ask them. And there's a series of questions that I usually go through with clients to get those answers. Because sometimes they don't actually know that, right? So sometimes they're working a little bit backwards. They have an idea of, okay, I'm going to put on this big conference and I want to have 20 speakers and we're going to do it one day. And I'm like, wait a minute. You want to put 20 speakers in one day and we're going to put it in, and you want to do like a 4-hour session or something. And I'm going, that's really unrealistic for what your audience is going to want from it, because we have to understand that, especially if it's a virtual event, right? They're all different. That's the other thing too. If this is in person versus a hybrid versus just a virtual, the way that you structure it is also different too. And I explain that to people, because I primarily right now I'm specializing in hybrid events, but the goal has to, you have to look at the goals differently. The virtual component of whatever you're doing versus the in-person component, those goals are going to be the same, but the way you get there is a little bit different. People want to replicate what they would do in person virtually, and it doesn't work the same, right? So if you put the pieces together and look at it from the user experience, you usually have a better outcome for that. I mean, that's just because this is trial and error. This is things that I've done and I know that I've done wrong, or we've made mistakes in the past, or we've had clients that we tried to let them lead the entire process and it didn't work out that well because they didn't have an idea of really what their user needed to have in the end. So there's specific questions that I do to help create a better experience. And then you can really put together the pieces that are going to be revenue driving, right? So if I know what the goal is, if I know what success looks like to them, how can I deliver success to them and without over promising, right? You want to under promise and then over deliver so that what I give you is going to be more than what you expected, right? So that's how I kind of put it together. I have to put those pieces together before I do that. So.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. So Julie, I actually have a similar question for you. So when you meet with event planners to set up a sponsorship plan or sales strategy, what kind of questions do you ask the client to make sure that you're setting up the right sponsorship packages? And also the prospective sponsors in order to optimize those sponsor sales?
So definitely one question that always comes up first. Can you produce this event financially with 0 sponsors? And that is not a question that very many event planners or festival producers like to hear, especially if it's their first event that they've done, or it's a new event that they're doing. It's a little bit of a shocking question sometimes because they automatically presume they can bring sponsors in to cover the cost, which is not something that should ever be done. There are very few circumstances where situations like that work. So, I mean, it is possible, but it is highly, highly unlikely. And at the end of the day, if you do set up an event that way, you're setting it up for failure because one sponsor pulls out and all of your other sponsors and the event itself is gone, right? So it's just not a sustainable process. So that's definitely the first question that I ask, to make sure everyone's on the same page about what the expectations are. I think, as Marisa said, setting expectations is incredibly important, especially in my role, talking with brands as well as the event producers and all those pieces. And then I go into some deeper questions about, what are the deliverables? What do they look like? Do you know what a deliverable is? That's something that you are, providing to the sponsor's giving you cash, but you have to give them something in return. So whether those are, marketing pieces or they're physically on site doing an activation, I mean, the options are endless and I like to get creative. So that leads into another question that I ask. What is the one thing that you want to do or have wanted to do at this event in the past? And it was the craziest idea, and you probably came up with it over a couple of cocktails. And you said, that's never going to happen because we don't have a budget for it. And that's where I raise my hand and say, hi, I would like to bring in a sponsor to cover that cost because it is a turnkey opportunity. And there are a number of other questions as well. A lot of the basic ones that you would ask, that Marisa spoke about, but those are some that are specific to sponsorship. Deliverables are incredibly important. I won't go too deep into other processes, but deliverables and can you produce the event standalone with no sponsors? And what are the goals for sponsorship too? That's another huge one because most of the time people have expectations for what sponsorship dollars can come into an event, and generally they are not realistic. So we have that conversation and I'm very upfront and honest about what I think those, what the potential is for that particular event and talk about ways that we can increase that and get creative to make it beneficial across the board.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All right. So Nicole, I'm going to ask you a question next, and this is a little bit different. So does your organization, so you work for a venue, do you provide any extra services to potential clients on top of just the straight venue rental? And if so, how do you present those options to your prospects?
We absolutely do. And the way I present it is as a package. And I present the venue as a one-stop shop. So it's all encompassed. Like when you book with us, you don't have to look any further because we're going to take you full all the way through the process. You don't have to worry about catering. You don't have to worry about AV. You have to worry about nothing except coming in and making sure that your event, goes off with our assistance without a hitch, and people revel in that it's like, wow, we can come here and we don't have to, there's no add-ons that we need to do. We don't need to look for catering. It's already here. You have an AV team already there, and that's part of the sales. The more that you can offer your clients, the better setup you provide yourself and your organization. Because that way, people want things to be simple. Not always simple, but we try to make it as simple. It's true. We try to make it as simple as possible, because planning an event, and I think Julie, and with what she does with sponsorship, she hit on something. People think they know, but they really don't know. And they don't realize until you make them aware that they don't know. So that goes through that all throughout the sales process, because each and every piece of the planning process is part of that. What I referenced in the fireside chat is part of the toolkit.
So Marisa, I'm curious, since you come at it from more of the brand side, and you're actually the one who's going out and seeking out venues for your clients, do you have any thoughts about what Nicole just said from like the buyer side, I guess?
You know what? What I like about that is, because I'm currently working with a venue that's very similar to what Nicole is talking about. I like when the venue that has that whole coordinated facilities access to that works really well in tandem with a planner that might not be from their team. I like it when it's really cohesive and we can work really well together, because that creates a really good experience for everybody, for us, for the client, for the people that are at the venue. And so that's great. I love the fact that she was talking about that. And what's funny about that is, I think her perspective about making sure that you have all those things covered. And I laughed at the simple part, because people do like simple. That was why I was laughing. I was laughing, so like, they do like simple. What they like is to have it done for them, right? They don't know it, but they like to have it done for them. They don't want to they don't want to have their nose in all the pieces, because they want it to just be done, right? So that's the same thing that I do that people don't understand. That's the same thing that I do even with my own team, though. So from the back end perspective of putting all the stuff together, my partners and the people that are on my team that work with me, I have everybody from, web developer to a graphic designer, strategist, assistants, virtual assistants, tech people, so that live stream editor, so that those things can get taken care of seamlessly on the back end of everything, right? From A to Z, kind of what Nicole had said before, so that we don't have to worry about those things. And entertainment partners, things like that, right? I have all of those things that I work with as well to put together entertainment, photography, those things, so that all of the event between a full-scale venue setup and our team, everything's taken care of. So it's exactly what Nicole was saying. So
awesome. And that's kind of why I asked all three of you here. Everyone's coming from a very different perspective. And I think what a lot of people, obviously everyone in the events industry knows this, but there are so many different moving parts. Attendees show up to an event and they think that it all just kind of magically happens, but there are so many different, all three of you are integral to the event process for so many different, and you're all managing your own teams. So I think that's something that is so important to remember. So thank you very much. Julie, I'm going to move back to you now, because I'm curious. You talked about the questions that you ask your clients and the people who are trying to sell the sponsorships. Now I'm curious, what kind of coaching or advice do you give to your sponsors themselves to make sure that they're taking full advantage of the sponsorships? The reason I ask this is because I actually used to work for a company that would sponsor events, and we went all out with our sponsorships. We'd show up to the conference in matching uniforms. We'd have all these giveaways and everything, and we would clean up. We'd take home tons of leads. Other sponsors would sit at their tables on their computers all day long, and they wouldn't be wearing any branded stuff. They'd barely have a setup. And then they would complain to the event organizers, like, oh, we didn't get any leads. Yeah. So I always like to ask, and I've been dying to ask you this because you're a sponsorship expert. How do you make sure that the sponsors themselves are taking advantage of the opportunities that your clients are selling?
Well, the first is to make sure that they know what all their options are. Right. And, and then to also find out what their goals are. similar to what Marisa was talking about before. So is the goal branding? Do they just want to get the name out there, right? And do they want to physically be on site if it is an actual physical event? And those are two very different things. So determining which one of those two things that they want to do is kind of the start to that, and taking it from there. And I will always say, get creative, because at the end of the day, it's not about what you want to do as a brand or what you as a festival wants to do. It's about what the attendee wants to see and what they will engage with. Because if you don't have engagement, then you might as well not even show up. There's no point to it. And so I kind of look at myself as the bridge between the event and the brand. And yes, at the end of the day, my client is the event. But at the same time, I've sat on the same side of the table as the brand. So I do have a pretty good insight as to what they're looking for and what their expectations are. And so taking those crazy ideas and saying, I say the same thing to the brand. What's the craziest thing you've ever wanted to do at an event? Like, no holds barred. Your budget doesn't matter. Like, tell me what you would love to see. And then I take that idea and say, okay, that's amazing. We can do a version of that. And that version can be unbelievably amazing and crazy as well, brought back to reality, or it can be a toned down version of that. Just depends on how many zeros you want to put on that check. So there are multiple different ways to do it. And I think being creative, being flexible is really important on the brand side as well as the event, but specifically for the brand. They may come in with a very specific idea, something that they've done at different events in the past, and it may not work for the specific event that we're discussing, whether it's logistics or depending upon what the venue is. There's so many different pieces to that puzzle, and just putting them all together in a way that really makes sense for them. So the brand being creative and flexible, which it seems silly to say that a brand needs to be creative, but to your point, sometimes they're not. And you have to think about the attendee, and you have to think about that specific audience for that particular event. For me, being in music festivals, an EDM audience is extremely different from a country audience or rock or any other genre, and you cannot come at them the same way, because if you do, it's very likely that you're going to fail. So knowing the audience and making sure that they truly understand what that audience is also another key piece to that.
Awesome. Those are really good pieces of advice. And so my next question, I was actually going to ask Julie and Marisa kind of a version, but I realized I can ask all three of you. So the next question is about activations. So kind of exactly what we were just talking about with sponsorships, but they can be applied at all different types of events. So kind of for all three of you, do you have any cool examples of out of the box activations, experiences that you've seen brands use? It's like the most creative thing that you can think of. Mine is probably this VR thing that we did at a conference a while back. We had attendees run around our booth and they were looking for foxes. We worked with a VR designer. So what are all three of your favorite examples? And Julie, since we were just talking about that, I'll have you go first.
Oh, this is so hard. I mean, there have been so many. For things that I wasn't necessarily a part of, I don't recall it was a vehicle brand. They did a car wash basically at a festival. And instead of actual water, they did bubbles, and it was this whole thing that you went through, and it was sort of like a dancing disco-ish type of car wash. And that was part of the activation. So you basically go through all these bubbles, and then they had, the giveaways and the contest and all that kind of stuff. But it was set up in a way that it really drew attendees into it. I mean, watching a video of it, you could probably Google it and find it. Was amazing. It was just awesome. And I was like, oh my gosh, I want to do that. I want to copy and paste it and do it at one of my festivals. Just an event in general that had amazing, engaging things that you just kind of reminded me of was Pokemon Go Fest. That in itself I was a part of that as well. Not on the sponsorship side, but on the experiential side. Probably one of the most interesting and fun events I've ever been a part of, just because, you look at the event and you see nothing as, just someone who's walking by, and then you actually look at the phones and look at all of the pieces that just really don't seem to have very many exciting things going on. And then you add the AR aspect to it, and it was just insane. For me personally, building a tattoo parlor in the middle of the jungle was probably my personal favorite so far. I have some interesting things coming up, but yeah, that was probably my favorite to this point.
I'm probably going to reach out to you about an interview just about the Pokemon Go Festival, because I have so many questions that I don't have time to ask now.
I have so many questions.
But that's amazing. So Nicole, I'm curious, at your venue, have you seen any, I know it's a little bit more on the business side with the being in the medical field, but have you seen any interesting? You have? Okay, cool.
No, I actually have. We had a tech company, and I really don't know how they did this, but they had this board that when you walked by it, it sort of read your emotions. It was weird. And it could be spot on. I know I walked by it and was like, oh, that's a little freakish. Let me get away from this thing. But you know, it was just amazing, the technology that, you know, was at that event. And I was just like, wow. And then not so much on the brand side. This was actually a personal party that someone threw at our venue. And they actually had, and I thought this was amazing, kind of gross, but amazing. It was a Halloween party. They had a full-blown medical room, hospital room built. Yes, no lie. Had a live person dressed up with the chest. Oh, I'm not lying to you. I see your faces. Yes. And I was like, this is a little freakish, but cool. Very cool. So those were the two that stick in my head.
Memorable, very memorable.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. All right, and then Marisa, so what are some of the out-of-the-box things that you've done with your event design for brands?
So what I'm more excited about some stuff that we're doing that's coming up. So one is going to be with a tech company, and I can't say all the things because people, but it's for real estate. And so real estate can be boring. We know this. And so we have some cool activations where it's kind of, there's going to be kind of what Julie, between a cross of what between Maddie and Julie both talked about with the VR and the AR. But it's going to be involving cryptocurrency in real estate. So with some activations and pieces showing you basically how people right now are moving and trading real estate using crypto, but with some really cool technology. So you'll actually be able to see like the build-ins and things like that. So that's really fun. I think it's going to be exciting for people because a lot of times when you go to these tech conferences, especially for real estate, they're not engaging. They're exactly what you guys are talking about. There's nothing for people, like people are looking at the technology, but they don't understand what it actually does. And so we wanted to have an immersive experience for a couple of these things. And then one of the other ones is like activations are so funny because I think that now with all of the tech that we have and all of the costuming and designing, sometimes we get away from doing something that can be just a little more simple. And one of them is a more competition style activation. So bringing it back to like with the cool effects, like we're doing like the effects that we'll have with the virtual and AV component stuff will be like you're passing the things around between the people that are competing, and they're also going to be doing it in person, so it's really fun. What I like about that is the competition element just is an activational in and of itself, right? Because we love to cheer for people. We love to root somebody on. What's better than like pitting your keynote speakers against each other, or pitting like, for example, I'm doing a cybersecurity one. So like between the fire safety rescue and police teams and stuff like that. So it's hard to say some of the stuff that we're doing because like I can't say it all out loud, but some of those elements are really exciting. And I think just because we'll be able to integrate the technology, but then also the simplicity of having something that's just truly engaging for people regardless of what they're doing. And competition, to me, it's one of the things that I like to come up with for people, is one of the things I think that it really engages people in the right way, right? Not where we're just like give you 5 points for completing this task on this conference. It's like, no, let's put you guys together and let's vote for you and let's have a really fun kind of like we're inside of a game show. That's one of my favorites. So yeah.
Awesome. So then kind of building off of that question. So Marisa, you say that your firm, your company creates digital enchantment through virtual experiences. So that digital enchantment, that's that immersive experience. How does that enchantment then translate into revenue and brand value for your client?
Oh, I love this question. The two ladies, well, you guys are above me on the screen right now, but the two ladies here are smiling because they like it too. They're like, creating that for people. The reason why I used enchantment, we went through the gamut of actually of adjectives when we were looking at that, and a lot of people use experiential, right? Experience. A lot of people use there's another word for boutique. I'm just trying to think of it right now. It's not at the top of my head, but you guys know exactly what I'm talking about. Use those those terminology and that verbiage for it. And I went, you know what, enchantment's better because I really want people to be immersed in the experience, not just experiential, but I want them to come out of it like as if they were reading a book or watching a really great movie. By the way, watching a movie is an event just so people can, know that. And that's where I went with it. I went into my mind, like, that's what I think of every experience that I create for somebody is as if like you were sitting on your couch watching a movie. How would you want to come out of that? Like when you watched a really great movie, how do you come out of it? You come out of it like a little transformed, a little enchanted, a little excited. You're still talking about what happened in the movie with the people around you. That's the reason I use that terminology and how that drives sales. Think about this for a second, right? When you're engaged, excited, and like really just totally immersed in what you're doing, you're ready to buy. Like I know, for example, I'm a complete Marvel nerd, right? I've already bought into all the rest of the movies that are coming out in the series because I'm engaged. I love that. I'm already there. You don't have to convince me to go watch the next one. I'm going to watch it, right? It's the same thing with your clients. If you're creating a series of events, that's what I like to do. I like to create a long-term relationship with my clients so that we can use events to help drive their brand all the time. If you're thinking in that term, you're going to get the engagement and the experience out of that one so that you can create that ecosystem and you can go, they'll come to the next one and they'll come to the next one and they'll come back to that one again because they've been so excited to be at the ones that you've created before. That's driving sales. That's putting that brand out there, brand recognition, right? People are going to know who that is because they've been to that before. That's my opinion. So
awesome. That's a really great answer to that question. So the rest of the questions I have are for all of you, and I have a few more. We may not get to all of them. Just another reminder for the audience, we will be doing live Q&A with our panelists in a workshop in about 7.5 minutes. So what you'll do is after this session ends in 7 minutes, you'll exit out, go back to the agenda and click on audience Q&A, and you'll join that workshop and you'll be able to ask all of your questions to our panelists within that setting. So my next question for all three of you, and we'll start with Nicole, is how do you collect feedback from your clients and even your clients' attendees to make sure that your sales process is optimized moving forward?
We do surveys, and that may sound antiquated, but I don't think surveys will ever go away. And I think they're the best method out there because it provides a way of the client, the attendee, of being anonymous, confidential. And what you want them to be open, because as I said previously in another session, you have to take the bad with the good, and you kind of almost, you want more of the bad because that's the part you want to improve upon, So yes, so survey questions. And you have to have, open-end questions and write down to, as I said before, it's funny, but not funny. How clean was the bathroom? Mm-hmm. Was there enough tissue? Really, and I use this analogy, but I'll say it again and keep using it. It's like when you have a party at your house and you invite people over. Don't you want them to have the best experience that there is? It's the same thing with an event. And an event is an experience. That's exactly what it is. It's not, I cringe a little bit when people say it's just an event. Oh, no, it's not. No, it's an experience. That's what we are providing. Mm-hmm. It's an experience. So the survey, going back to your question, the survey allows us to ask about each of those touch points. How was catering? How was audio visual? How were the rooms? Were they clean enough? Were there enough lighting in the room? Was there enough space In the main session, how are the breakouts? So you can get into the nuts and bolts of every single touch point that your attendees and clients come in contact with.
Awesome. Julie, how about you? And I'm sure another question for you, Julie, in addition to how are you collecting feedback? Do you also collect feedback from both your clients and the sponsors that you sell to?
Yes. So if we're talking about collecting feedback from my client as well as the sponsors, absolutely. The attendees is a kind of a whole different story. When it's on the attendee side and how that translates over to the sponsor and how, to figure out whether or not the event was successful. Lots of data, right? So, social media post tracking, click tracking. I don't have the right terminology for any of it because it's very outside of my scope. I have amazing marketing teams that I work with that, that assist on that side of it. I try to learn more about it every day. So if anybody's amazing at that, please feel free to reach out to me. I always like to learn more. But when it specifically comes to my clients and the sponsors, same thing. Old school surveys, right? I know what the numbers are. I know how many people clicked on X sponsor's social media story that came out 2 weeks before the festival. I know that. And I can see that information. And also leads into the conversations because if the numbers weren't great, then I know it's not going to be an easy conversation to have. But that also tells us that there was something that didn't go right. And to Nicole's point, I love to hear what did not go right. I don't want bad things to happen, but I do want to know what the negative experience was or the not amazing experience, right? Because it's something that I tell anyone that I work with, my own personal staff, or event staff, whatever, sponsors, my clients, everyone. If I don't know there's a problem, I can't fix it. I am not psychic. I don't have a genie in a bottle. I'm here to help and I'm here to fix the problems. But if I don't know it exists, I can't do it. So those surveys are really important. And I think that over the course of time, and again, depending upon the event, of course, but over the course of time, you figure out what questions should go in there. And they continuously evolve. And I find more questions that I should pop in there all the time about those different experiences. But I love a good survey.
Awesome. And then Marisa, we'll end up with you. One additional just kind of question on top of the one about collecting feedback. So most people use surveys. We've talked about surveys. If you're using surveys, do you have any tips or tricks on how to get people to actually fill those surveys out?
Ooh, I love that. So yes, surveys are great. But like you say, are they going to fill them out? Not necessarily. So 2 things that we do. One, we slip surveys in the middle of our events. So if you use anything like a digital activation, if you use like a photography element or something where people can snap a photo of themselves at the event with the background and stuff like that, what we do with the company that we've partnered with is they put the survey inside of it. So complete a few questions, get the pic, and then you get the picture, right, returned into your inbox right away. That's a great way to get survey midpoint of whatever you're doing so that you can find out what's going really well throughout your event. So that's one thing. Put it inside of something else that's disguised as a freebie or a gift or something to them, because no one's going to care about answering 5 questions if they get this free cool photo of themselves in the middle of your event. Awesome. Number 1. And then the second one is add an incentive, right? So a small gift card, an Amazon gift card, a little giveaway, if you have sponsors like Julie, et cetera, have them donate a little bit of gift cards or whatever as incentives to however many people, you'll be entered into a drawing to get a gift card for such and such. That's an incentive to me to fill out a survey, because I'm like, oh yeah, $20 Amazon gift card. Great. All I have to do is answer 10 questions about this event that I went to. Right. And you're not necessarily going to give them to everybody, but you're going to get put in a drawing and you'll give away 5 of them or something. And the chances of winning, hey, you never know how many people went, are fairly high or good. And it's easy. So incentivize people at the end. I think that's great. The other thing is then to ask, a lot of people just forget to ask. So for clients, this is the third thing. It's for your clients specifically, and maybe like the brands and stuff that you're working with as like the event person. For me to say, hey, could you please do me a favor and go ahead and fill out the survey while we're going through like an exit interview or something? Because if they do it with you really quickly, then you can go through questions that you have right away, and then they've already done it. So those are my 3 kind of tips for using surveys for events.
Amazing. Awesome. So we are at the end of our structured discussion now. We're all going to leave the studio here. If you go back out into the virtual event hub and click on the lobby button at the top of the main menu, you will be able to see the audience Q&A workshop session. Just head over there and you'll be able to raise your hand and ask your questions to our panelists live face to face. So thank you all for being here, and we will see you over there.
Thank you.